Hi, everyone. We're live today with Shervin Javadi. He is the CEO of Shero Diagnostics, and Dr. Matthew Gombrich, the CMO of Shero Diagnostics. Hi, Shervin and Matt. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you for setting this up.
Of course. So we're excited to learn more about you, first and foremost, you both, and then Shero Diagnostics and how you all are improving laboratory testing efficiency and patient outcomes with your technology. So again, thank you for taking the time to chat with us in the midst of your fundraising time. And for those who are joining live, thank you for tuning in. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have for Shervin and Dr. Gombrich in the Ask a Question box or in the chat box if that's easier for you at the bottom of your screen. Shervin and Matt, before we get into the details of the business model and your Series A raise, can you just tell us a bit about your background to get us started?
Sure. So my formal background is in engineering. I have a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, focused on thermal fluids, minor in biology and chemistry, and an MBA. Experience-wise, I'm the CEO and co-founder of both Shero Diagnostics and Stratadigm Inc. And Shero Diagnostics is kind of the clinical application of Stratadigm Inc.'s technology and instrumentation. Prior to that, I was the fluidics team leader for the Faxaria at Becton Dickinson. The Faxaria is the leading sorter on the market. It's generated over $2 billion in revenue since the year 2000. And its success is kind of based on 3 patents that kind of defined its technology and architecture. And I had the opportunity to co-author those patents with my team. I was also the hardware manager for the Fax Canto, which is BD's flagship analyzer in the cytometry market. That product set a record for the fastest product to be commercialized, for fastest IVD product to be commercialized, right under 14 months from inception to production. And other than that, I've spent years mostly in product development, but also manufacturing, production, new business development, sales, and marketing.
Thank you, Shervin, for sharing your background.
So Ashley, thank you for having me. My name is Matthew Gombrich, and I'm CMO for Shero Diagnostics. My background is a little bit circuitous. I was actually a music major for my undergraduate degree, and then fell in love with science. Ended up going to Case Western Reserve School of Medicine for both a master's degree in experimental pathology, and then my MD degree, where I did my clinical work both at University Hospitals of Cleveland and the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. Went right into industry right out of medical school and was involved in the commercialization and development of several infectious disease tests, the pneumococcal pneumonia urinary antigen test and Legionnaire's disease test that Binax developed. I was part of the team that both developed and then got through the FDA, and then did some more phase 4 clinical trials on those 2 products. My background with regards to Shervin and the technology, I'll get into a little bit more, but I was working for a company that was doing some basic science research, doing microbiology using flow cytometry. And I reached out to Shervin and we formed a friendship. And I'll talk more about the technology when we get further into the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing your background. So I guess my next question is, what's the why behind Shero Diagnostics? How did you both get into building this company? And what problem is your company solving?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll take that question. So I think this is the best place to talk about how I got involved with the Stratadigm and Shero technology. When this other company I was working for was kind of debating about getting into the infectious disease market, I had developed some chemistry with regards to tagging bacteria. And I knew for the market applications that we were going after that automation was an absolute necessity. And there is only one cell analysis system in the world that has full automation. And what I mean by full automation is the ability to add reagents, mix reagents, move a plate into an incubator, stack multiple patient samples, and if necessary, centrifuge samples. There is only one technology in the world that can do that, and that was what Shervin had developed at Stratadigm. And so when we were doing some research that had shown that his system had incredibly good correlation between traditional culture quantitative microbiology and the bacterial enumeration that we were seeing on the instruments. Shervin and I formed a friendship, and for reasons we can talk about later, he eventually came to me to ask me to be part of the Shero team. And so we have formed the company with the basic premise that it is the analytical engine capabilities of the system coupled with the automation that makes several things really, really transparent with regards to clinical pathology, which is improved patient outcomes. And I'll talk about a little bit in more detail about the fact that we can do urinary tract testing diagnostics in 3 hours directly out of the urine, as opposed to 1 to 3 days, which is currently done for clinical microbiology. And then improving the economics of the lab as well by bringing that automation suite into the pathology lab, which is a necessity nowadays in clinical pathology. So we feel those two things coupled together, as well as the fact that more and more papers are coming out using cell-based analysis as clinical diagnostics, as opposed to something like just PCR, we think this is a home run.
Got it. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
And so you kind of touched on like how you both came together, but can you all talk more about the team and why your team is the team to build and scale Shero Diagnostics?
Yeah, if you look at the market that we play in, it's very multidisciplinary. And so we have a unique combination of not only engineering excellence, manufacturing operations scalability, but also a lot of in-depth knowledge in assay chemistry and regulatory history and clinical adoption. And so one of the biggest barriers to market in our field is, it's difficult to get that many different core competencies under one roof and get everybody to execute well. I think we're in a pretty unique situation to do an excellent job of that.
Thank you. And I guess another question I have before we get into the business model and investment opportunities, how has COVID impacted the way that you think about your business and the way, entrepreneurship generally, but how has COVID, I feel like that's the common question these days.
Is living with stress an appropriate answer to that question? I think we're all dealing with that. Well, for me, what it's done, Ashley, is it's really highlighted the true platform nature of what Shervin has developed at Stratodyne. So the beauty of cytometry in general, but especially the cytometry coupled with the automation, is it has a very wide breadth of the targets that it can go after. So traditionally, cytometry is used for cell-based analysis in leukemia and lymphoma, both diagnosis and disease therapeutic monitoring. But what Shervin has done so eloquently with the system is he has brought the analytical capabilities on the low end of the system to the point where we can enumerate bacteria and see viruses to a certain extent. And so when this hit, we started looking at what the opportunity was for COVID diagnostics, not using RT-PCR, which is the standard RNA amplification methods that's used in traditional diagnostics. And we found through one of the publications that this gentleman had put out, a team in MIT that had developed using synthetic biology peptides that bind to the SARS virus. And so we have formed a relationship and subsequently sent in 2 very large grant proposals, one to NIH, one to BARDA, to adopt his technology using our automated system for diagnosing COVID. We have a subsequent application. We're filing the IP on it next week for serological analysis that is a much more detailed serological study as opposed to what's being done today. So we've adopted the technology. We are going after the microbiology bacteria. We've adopted and adapted the technology to focus on the viral diagnostics as well.
Got it. Thank you for explaining that. All right, now for the fun and interesting stuff in terms of the business model. Can you explain how Shero's Sana, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Sana platform and how it works?
Yeah, so the Shero's Sana platform is really based on providing a solution across the 3 verticals of oncology, allergy, and infectious disease. And that solution involves the instrumentation, which is the hardware and the software, the AI engine, with Boolean logic making capabilities. It's protected by 10 patents, 2 pending. and it's really designed to start with the instrumentation software, provide the reagents, the chemistry, and the disposable cartridge, and also the service and training, which is really critical in terms of getting equipment in a hospital working and making sure that the infrastructure is there. So in case there's any need for service, we can respond rapidly to that.
Thank you, Shervin. And can you go into the business model, the specifics of the business model? Who are your customers, and how are you acquiring them?
Sure. So we have three basic, what we call vertical focused areas in clinical pathology. The traditional leukemia, lymphoma diagnosis and monitoring that's done today, albeit without automation. The infectious disease, the two major applications that we have there are the rapid UTI test that I alluded to, and we will also have a rapid antibiotic susceptibility test that will work on positive blood culture samples. The early data that we have is that we can apply quantitative microbiology to a subculture and get results in under 5 hours directly off the subculture. And then the third vertical that we're going after is a novel way that's growing in Europe for doing allergy testing called basophil activation testing. That is a more clinically relevant assessment of the way that certain white blood cells react to an allergen. Our model for penetrating the system, for penetrating the market is, with the detailed documents that we can provide anybody who's interested, is in our sales and marketing allocation of funds, we plan on partnering with the key opinion leaders in those three vertical areas. We plan on basically giving the system to them for free and having them both do our regulatory data acquisition and subsequent publications to seed the market with the data showing the superiority of our technology.
Wow. Thank you for breaking that down.
Sure.
And then I guess the other question I have is what competitors exist and what's Shero Diagnostics' competitive advantage with the competitors that are out there?
Sure. So in the oncology vertical that I talked about, there's only two players in that market, Becton Dickinson and Beckman Coulter. Beckman Coulter is the only company that has a disposable reagent cassette for leukemia and lymphoma. It's limited in the claims that it's made in front of the FDA. So the advantage that we have in that segment is they do not have full automation. And what I can tell you is when it comes to certain testing algorithms in leukemia and lymphoma, especially around something called MRD or measurable residual disease, is these protocols that are taking place that have been allocated in Europe and are gaining traction here in the United States are becoming extremely complicated. The hands-on bench work for some of these tests, upwards of 3 hours of bench time. And with the use of manual methods, because he and Beckman Coulter don't have full automation, there's many areas where error rates can be quite high. And Shervin and I went to a conference earlier this year where several speakers talked about error rates with regards to this and variation in results because of the fact that these manual methods are really, really labor intensive. So our advantage is standardizing the test, loading the sample, hitting a button, walking away, and then having results automatically generated. In the infectious disease sector, what I can tell you is there is nothing on the market that can do the UTI application that we are bringing to market in under 3 hours, and that includes antibiotic susceptibility profiling for that. And with regards to antibiotic susceptibility testing for the bloodstream market, the two biggest competitors we have right now are traditional methods and a company called Shero Diagnostics out of Arizona that is doing morphological assessment. The problem they have is they do not have high throughput capabilities. Their cassette is extremely expensive. It's upwards of $200 for the cassette, and it's very large and needs to be stored at 4 degrees. Ours is very small, very cost effective, and can be stored at room temperature.
Awesome. Thank you for explaining that and breaking that down. I know that in the investment packet that we sent out to members that you included 2 letters of support, I believe one from Health and Human Services and the other from Cleveland Clinic. So can you talk about the support you've been receiving from institutions and some of the other targeted partnerships that you have been working with to accelerate your growth?
Sure. I try to talk to as many, my true love is an infectious disease. So I speak to a lot of microbiology directors and people that are dealing with that type of testing. And, with the theme that keeps on coming over and over again is faster results leads to more focused therapy, better outcomes, better economic outcomes for the healthcare system. And so, my alma mater, Case Western Reserve, I tend to stay active with the people that are there. The assistant director from University Hospital of Cleveland just moved to they don't refer to them as the lab directors at the Cleveland Clinic. They refer to them as team leads, I think. He is now the team lead for microbiology over there. Dan Rhodes is his name. Dan has been very supportive of our technology. We also have a letter from University of Vermont Medical Center, the micro director there, Dr. Christy Wojawoda. Christy has actually done some work with us in my previous company on the initial assessment of urinary tract quantitative microbiology. She did not do any of the antibiotic susceptibility testing. She hopefully will in the future when we bring that into clinical validation. But Christy's been very supportive of the technology and wrote us the letter. And Shervin can speak to the CDC. It's an active relationship he has with regards to Stratodime.
Yeah, so we've had a long relationship with CDC. They've been a customer for many, many years. They have a lot of our units installed in both the BSL-4 and the BSL-2 lab. And so when we talked to them about this new kind of patented technologies we have for rapid detection of COVID, they were very excited, and immediately they were kind of eager to jump on board. They've wrote us letters of support for the grant that we're planning to do in collaboration with both them and MIT. So I think we're very stoked about the potentials of that.
Awesome. All right. So the other questions one other question I have regarding business model before we go into the investment opportunity is what do you see as some principal risk, potential risk for the company? Any operational, technology, or legal risks?
Yeah, so within the healthcare segment, one of the biggest risks is just the rate of adoption tends to be slow for any kind of a new platform or new technology. We're aware of that. We think we've addressed it in our financials. We think our financials are very conservative. In terms of operations risk, technological risk, regulatory risk, I think Shero is a very unique situation because it's really piggybacking off of 10 years of commercial history in the RUO market through Stratodime. So none of those normal risks that are associated with scaling manufacturing or technology or is this going to work or even service infrastructure are actually there. So even though Shero's going out for what we call a Series A round of funding, it's really more like a Series C because the platform has been in development or in production since 2009.
Awesome. Thank you, Shervin. And so really quickly, before we go into the investment opportunities, I want to ask the members and everyone who's joined live, if you have any questions that you'd like or specific things you'd like Shervin and Matt to speak to, please submit them in the chat box and we'll address them at the end. But for now, Shervin and Matt, I want to have you explain more about the Series A raise and the economics, how much are you raising and how do you plan to use the funds that you raise for this round?
Yeah, so when we kind of went through the economic projections and also the cost involved with that, because we have a running start again, of our existing business model, we think that our financials are pretty accurate. We're looking to raise a Series A of $14 million, and that'll take us to profitability and beyond. And obviously there'll be additional opportunities to invest. If we want to grow and maybe acquire some other strategic partners in the process. The bulk of that $14 million is being allocated to sales and marketing. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the slow adoption rate tends to be a little bit of a risk, so we want to make sure we have the right resources to accelerate that in a responsible and realistic way. The rest is out for a little bit of R&D and product development, especially in the realm of assay chemistry and the disposable cartridge design. And then the rest goes through operations, legal, and regulatory.
Thank you. All right, I'm checking to see if there were any questions submitted. I don't see any questions. So before we kind of wind down the conversation, I want to give you all both the opportunity to share anything else that you think would be helpful for members to know about Shero Diagnostics, anything that my questions may not have touched on.
Yeah, I think just you kind of mentioned, the impact of COVID. I think when we first looked at this, I think like most other businesses, we were a little bit concerned and confused about how it's going to affect us. But I think the old saying, necessity is a mother of invention. I think not only has it given us the opportunity to enter into a new field that we think we can have a pretty significant impact in, something that probably is going to be with us for the next decade in terms of the need for rapid diagnostics of not only COVID but other novel viruses. But also, I think it's taught us a little bit about this wide net of relationships that we already have in place that through collaboration can provide a lot of synergy to the business.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Shervin.
And actually, I would focus, what I would say is that often we get questions about reimbursement. And so I didn't want anybody on the call to think that we had not thought about reimbursement and some of the drivers of adoption for these three verticals. The example that I love to give is the UTI application. So currently today, from the data that's both in the literature and from talking to several lab directors throughout the country, every urine culture that's performed, which remember is the second highest test that's performed behind blood chemistry in most pathology labs throughout the world, is a money-losing proposition. It costs them about $15 to perform that test. That's just the upfront, is there a UTI there? Reimbursement, at least from CMS, is about $11.60. Our test cost about, well, I don't want to give the exact number, several dollars, but there is already a CPT code available for quantitative microbiology not using culture that reimburses at $29. And so our intention as one of the major drivers for the UTI application is not only we can automate this, not only can we do this in 3 hours, we can turn this from a money-losing proposition for your lab to a money-making proposition for your lab. And similar arguments can be made for each of the other two verticals. Oncology by bringing automation in, and the same argument about automation for the allergy testing market.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt. Reimbursement is definitely an important thing to touch on, so I'm glad that you raised that.
Yep.
I still don't see any other questions, and so if there's nothing else that you all would have to share, I want to again thank you for your time with sharing and presenting to SVG. And for those members who weren't able to join live, we'll share with them this recording and your contact information so that they can follow up with you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye.